The day my bonus hit my account, I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't even tell anyone right away. I just sat on the edge of my bed in my small apartment and stared at my phone in absolute silence, watching the number refresh like it might vanish if I blinked too hard. $10,000. Not inheritance. Not a gift. Not borrowed. Earned. Fully. Cleanly. Mine. I had spent years waking up before sunrise, answering emails before brushing my teeth, sitting through meetings while my stomach growled, staying late while the city outside dimmed into neon and noise. And now, for the first time in my life, effort had turned into something undeniable. $10,000 didn't mean luxury to me. It meant breath. It meant margin. It meant I could make one mistake and still stand. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and whispered out loud, "Nobody can take this from me." I was wrong. 2 days later, my parents forgot my birthday. Completely. Not even a late text. No call. No voicemail. No excuse. I turned 28 alone with grocery store cake and 1 candle because the pack came with 6 and I only needed 1. I sang to myself quietly so the neighbors wouldn't hear. The next morning, my mother posted a public congratulations on my younger cousin's engagement with a long caption about family milestones. My birthday photo from 3 years ago still sat buried somewhere in her feed, unliked, uncommented, unnoticed. I felt stupid for expecting anything different. That same afternoon, my father called. No greeting. No pause. Straight to the point. "We heard about your bonus." My spine locked. "Who told you?" "Your aunt saw your post," he said. I had shared a vague celebration selfie, nothing about money. Someone had done the math for them. "Congratulations," he added loosely, like a formality taped to a demand. "Thank you," I said. There was a short silence. Then, like he was saying the weather forecast, he continued, "Your mother and I talked. You should send us half." I actually laughed at first. A sharp, confused sound that escaped before I could stop it. "Half of my bonus?" I asked. "Yes," he said calmly. 5,000. "It's only fair." "Fair for what?" I whispered. "For raising you," he replied. My chest tightened. "For everything we invested in you over the years." The room felt smaller. "You forgot my birthday yesterday," I said quietly. "That doesn't erase 28 years of parenting," he snapped. "Funny," I replied, my voice steady in a way I didn't feel inside. "Because you erased me for most of those 28. He exhaled harshly. "Don't start being dramatic now that you finally have money." That sentence split something open in me. I thought about the birthdays with no cake. College years where my tuition came from debt and night shifts, not family support. The years of being called independent when what they meant was conveniently unsupported. "You didn't help me build this," I said. "So why do you feel entitled to it?" "Because family shares," he replied immediately. I smiled without humor. "You didn't share when I was drowning." Silence stretched on the line. Then my mother picked up the phone on speaker. "We're not asking for all of it," she said in that soft, manipulating tone I'd known my whole life. "Just a portion. We need help with the house. And your brother's situation is complicated right now." There it was. The real reason. My brother. Again. Always. The family emergency that only existed when I succeeded. "So let me understand," I said. "You forget my birthday. Then you remember me when you need money." "Don't twist this," she said sharply. "We're proud of you." "Proud doesn't come with invoices," I replied. My father scoffed. "You're acting like this is extortion." I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. "No," I said. "This is entitlement. If you send the money," my mother added quickly, "we'll finally be able to fix the roof and help your brother secure his next steps." I closed my eyes. I could already see how this story would go. I would pay. They would thank me briefly, then forget again. And next time I succeeded, the price of my existence would go up. "I'm not your emergency fund," I said. My father's voice hardened instantly. "So you're choosing money over family now?" I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. "No," I said. "You're choosing money over me and pretending it's family." The line went dead. I sat there in the quiet, my untouched coffee cooling beside me, and realized this was the first real test of whether my boundaries were real or just a theory. And this time there would be consequences either way. The rest of that day passed in a blur of noise that didn't reach me and silence that rang too loud inside my head. I went to work like nothing had happened. I answered emails with polite precision. I sat in meetings nodding at the right moments. But every few minutes, my phone buzzed face down on my desk like a ticking bomb. I didn't need to check it to know who it was. That evening, the messages started. First from my mother. "We're hurt by how cold you were today." Then from my aunt. "Your parents sacrificed so much for you. Don't be selfish now that you've made it." Then from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. "Family helps family. You'll regret this if you don't." It was like watching a hive wake up all at once, each voice repeating the same script in slightly different words. I stared at the screen feeling 12 years old again, standing in the kitchen while adults talked over me about what was best for me without ever asking what I wanted. I didn't reply to any of them. An hour later, my brother called. His name on the screen made my stomach drop in a familiar way. I answered anyway. "They're freaking out," he said without introduction. "They told everyone you refused." "I didn't refuse," I said quietly. "I said no." He sighed. "You know how they get. Dad's furious. Mom's crying. They're saying you let money go to your head." I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "They didn't care when I didn't have any." "That's not fair," he protested weakly. "They always cared." I closed my eyes. "They cared when you needed help," I said. "They cared when you needed tuition, housing, breathing room. When I needed those things, they told me to learn." He went silent. I could hear him thinking, struggling with two versions of the same childhood colliding inside him. "They're under a lot of pressure right now," he said finally. "So was I," I replied. "For years. Alone. It's just 5,000, he added quietly. The number landed on my chest like a weight. "It's just half of something I bled to earn," I said. "And it won't be the last half. If I pay once, I'll pay forever." He didn't argue after that. He just said, "They're saying if you don't send it, they'll remember this." I leaned against my kitchen counter, looking at the city lights outside my window. "So will I said and hung up. That night, I barely slept. Every time I drifted off, I replayed old scenes in a new light. My first paycheck in college that disappeared into bills while my brother got a new laptop as a study necessity. The times I'd been sick and told not to exaggerate. The way I'd learned to celebrate alone because waiting for them always ended in disappointment. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, I realized something that scared me more than their anger. I wasn't afraid of losing them anymore. I was afraid of losing myself again if I gave in. The next day, my father showed up at my apartment without warning. I heard the knock and knew instantly it wasn't a neighbor. He knocked the way he always had, firm, entitled, as if doors were formalities rather than boundaries. I opened it slowly. He didn't step inside. He looked past me into my living room like he was assessing inventory. "So this is where my money landed," he said bitterly. "Your money?" I asked calmly. "Everything you have traces back to us in some way," he replied. "No," I said. "Everything I have traces back to work you never saw." His jaw tightened. "You've become unrecognizable," he muttered. "Good," I said. "Because you only recognize the version of me that didn't cost you anything. We didn't raise you to be like this, he snapped. You raised me to survive neglect, I answered. This is the result. He stepped closer, lowering his voice like he used to when he wanted control without witnesses. If you don't send that money, don't expect us to show up for you anymore. I met his eyes without flinching. You already didn't, I said. That was when something in his expression cracked. Not guilt, not remorse, but the shock of realizing his threat had landed in empty space. He stared at me like I had slipped out of his reach completely and only now noticed. This isn't over, he said quietly. It is for me, I replied and closed the door. My hand shook after. Not with fear. With release. The day after my father showed up at my door, the entire family network lit up like a coordinated attack. It wasn't just messages anymore. It was voices. Calls stacked on top of each other. Voicemails full of sighs, disappointment, and thinly veiled threats wrapped in concern. My aunt left a 3-minute message about gratitude. My uncle lectured about respect. A cousin I barely recognized tried to shame me by name-dropping our grandparents like ancestral guilt could force my hand. I deleted them without listening to the end. At work, my phone buzzed again and again in my bag. I didn't check it until lunch. 12 missed calls. All family. None asking how I was. All asking where the money was. That was the moment the truth settled into me fully. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing access to me. That evening, my brother asked if we could meet. We sat in a quiet cafe near my place, the kind with soft lighting and muted music that makes secrets feel heavier. He looked exhausted. They're not stopping, he said. They're saying you embarrassed them. By keeping my own money, I replied. They're also saying, he hesitated. They're saying if you don't send it, they might sell the house and downsize. And that it'll be your fault. The words hit but didn't wound the way they once would have. They were going to sell eventually anyway, I said. I'm just a convenient villain now. He stirred his coffee without drinking it. They told everyone the bonus was proof you owe them. I smiled weakly. Funny how my success suddenly became communal property. We sat in silence for a moment. Then he looked up at me with eyes that finally didn't belong to a favored child but to a tired adult. If you send it, he said slowly, they'll never stop. I nodded. I know. If you don't, he continued, they'll punish you socially. Holidays. Events. Everything. I took a breath. They already taught me how to be alone on special days. He looked down. I don't want to lose you, he said quietly. That was new. Not as a possession. Not as a support beam. As a person. You won't, I said. But they might. And that won't be because of money. It'll be because of choices. That night, I made my first real move. Not emotional. Not reactive. Strategic. I opened my banking app and transferred the entire $10,000 out of my checking account and into a locked savings account with no instant access and no shared visibility. For the first time, I made my money unreachable. Then I set a rule on my phone. All family numbers to voicemail. No exceptions. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was tension without noise. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived at my apartment. From my parents' lawyer. I opened it standing at my kitchen counter, my hands steady in a way they never used to be during conflict. The letter was polite. Clinical. Cold. It stated that my parents felt entitled to a family reimbursement for past support and that formal repayment would avoid unnecessary conflict. I read it twice. They hadn't even bothered to hide behind emotion anymore. This was now a transaction. I laughed softly and placed the letter in a drawer without replying. That evening, my mother texted from an unknown number. If you don't send the money, your father is considering cutting you out of the will. The old me would have panicked. The old me would have calculated futures based on inheritance that was never guaranteed. I typed a single reply. I already wrote my own will when I learned not to depend on you. I blocked the number immediately. That was the night I slept soundly for the first time since my bonus hit. Not because the conflict was over, but because the uncertainty inside me was. 3 days after the letter arrived, my father made his first real mistake. He underestimated how far I had already stepped outside their control. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I didn't scramble for advice from people who still believed blood was a debt. Instead, I called the one person they never expected me to involve, a lawyer. Not a family friend. Not someone loyal to my parents. A sharp, she didn't need my backstory kind of attorney recommended by my manager. I laid everything out in one steady breath. The bonus. The demand. The letter. The threats. The will. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause. Then he said, "They have absolutely no legal claim to your money." Relief hit me like oxygen after holding my breath too long. "But," he added, "the fact that they tried to use legal intimidation is serious. You did the right thing calling." The next morning, a formal response went out. Not emotional. Not defensive. Direct. Stated that I owed my parents nothing, that their claims were unfounded, and that any further attempts at harassment would be documented as coercion. They received it by noon. By dinner, the phone rang. My brother. "What did you do?" he asked in a stunned whisper. "I protected myself," I replied. "They're livid," he said. Dad tore the letter in half. "Mom's been crying all afternoon." I leaned against my balcony railing and watched the traffic slide by below. "Good," I said quietly. "They finally feel what control slipping sounds like." Silence stretched between us. "They didn't think you'd fight back," he admitted. "They never do," I answered. 2 days later, reality slapped them harder. My aunt called not to scold me, but to complain. "Your parents asked to borrow money from us," she said irritably. "They said it was temporary. For cash flow." I nearly laughed. "And I said no," she snapped. "Everyone's saying no. They got used to having your brother's tuition covered by them, and now that he's independent and you've cut them off, their budgets don't stretch the same." There it was. Truth peeling through the cracks. It had never been about the roof. Or an emergency. Or support. It was about access. They had structured their entire financial identity around always having someone beneath them to pay forward from. And now the ladders were gone. That weekend, I attended a small dinner with coworkers. First celebration since the promotion. Champagne. Cake. Laughter. I found myself actually smiling without calculating what the joy would cost me later. Halfway through the evening, my phone buzzed. A message from my father. Just 3 words. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen, then placed the phone face down and lifted my glass instead. "To boundaries," I toasted under my breath. The next morning, I met him in a public park near my apartment. Neutral ground. No home advantage. He looked smaller. Not physically. Emotionally. Like a man who had lost his script and didn't know his lines anymore. "You humiliated us," he said without greeting. "You tried to legally shake down your own daughter," I replied. "We're even." "You didn't need to escalate it," he snapped. "You escalated when you sent a lawyer after your own child," I said calmly. His jaw tightened. "This family doesn't turn on itself." I laughed quietly. "You turned on me when I was 19. You just didn't expect me to survive long enough to respond." The air between us went tight. "You think this makes you powerful?" he asked. "Holding your money hostage?" "No," I said. "It makes me free." He scoffed. "You think you're better than us now." "No," I replied. "I think I decide for myself now." He stared at me like the words came from a foreign language. "You don't understand what you're breaking," he muttered. "I understand exactly what I'm ending," I said. He stood abruptly. "When this blows back on you, don't come running," he warned. I remained seated. "I stopped running years ago," I said. He walked away without looking back. That night, my brother called again. His voice was low, almost shaken. "They're fighting nonstop," he said. "Not about you. About money. About blame. About control." I closed my eyes slowly. "Then it was never really about me," I said. "It was about who they could lean on without permission." And for the first time since childhood, I felt something dangerous and honest settle into my chest. Power dynamic had shifted. Permanently. The retaliation didn't come loudly. Came quietly through absence. First, the invitations stopped. No more forwarded family gatherings. No more casual group chats. No birthday reminders for relatives. It was as if my name had been quietly erased from the living version of the family tree. I found out about my cousin's baby shower through a tagged photo on social media. Everyone was there. Smiling. Holding pastel-colored gifts. My mother in the background, laughing like nothing in the world was wrong. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Not because I wanted to be there, but because I realized how easily I had been removed. That night, the loneliness hit differently than it ever had before. Not sharp. Not panicked. Just hollow. Like walking into a room you thought was yours and finding it already repainted. I didn't call anyone. I didn't confront anyone. I let the silence do what it was obviously meant to do, punish me socially for financial disobedience. My brother tried quietly to bridge the gap. He sent updates. Small things. "Mom bought a new couch. Dad's looking at refinancing again. They're saying you've changed." The last one made me laugh. "People always say that when you stop obeying," I told him. But I could hear the tension in his voice growing. He was being squeezed now by expectations, by guilt, by proximity. Meanwhile, my own circle shifted in ways I never expected. Without the constant emotional pull of my family, my friendships deepened. I started saying yes to dinners. Yes to weekend trips. Yes to rest. My coworkers became my holiday table. My apartment became an open place instead of a hiding place. One evening, over takeout and too much wine, my friend Lena looked at me and said, "You know, your family trained you to survive neglect, but they never trained you to receive care." The words lodged in my chest. 'Cause she was right. I had always known how to endure. I had never fully learned how to stay. In early winter, my mother finally broke the silence. Not with apology. With accusation. She texted, "Your father is sick with stress because of what you're doing." I stared at the screen, feeling the familiar pressure curl in my stomach, the old instinct to take responsibility for emotions that were never mine to manage. Then I typed slowly, "If boundaries make him sick, that isn't my diagnosis to treat." 3 dots appeared. Then vanished. She never replied. A week later, my aunt called again. This time, not to pressure me, but to inform me. "They've maxed the credit line," she said quietly. "They asked if you might reconsider just to stabilize things." I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. "No," I said gently. "I already stabilized myself." She sighed. "I thought you'd say that." And just like that, the narrative began to crack, not in front of my parents, but behind their backs. The same relatives who once parroted my parents' outrage began whispering doubts. It's strange how fast they burn through money. They never planned for retirement. They got used to your brother being supported and you being invisible. The truth began circulating without me having to speak it. My brother felt it the most. One night he called me after midnight. "They're pressuring me again," he said quietly. "To take your side or theirs." There are no sides, I said. There's only adulthood. He exhaled slowly. They want me to convince you. They think if I get you to send the money, everything resets. I felt heavy sadness spread through me. That's the most dangerous lie they tell, I said. That money fixes character. I don't want to be their leverage anymore, he whispered. My voice softened. Then don't be. 2 days later, he moved out. Back into the small apartment he shared with colleagues. No announcement. No family meeting. Just a quiet exit. The fallout at home was immediate. My mother accused him of betrayal. My father accused him of being infected with my selfishness. My brother called me afterward, shaken. I think I finally understand what it cost you to leave, he said. I swallowed hard. And I think you're finally understanding what it gives you too, I replied. That winter, the family split without a single official fracture. No one disowned anyone. No one made dramatic declarations. They just separated. On one side, control and resentment. On the other, distance and rebuilding. And I realized something deeply unsettling and deeply empowering at the same time. My parents had spent their entire lives tying love to obligation. And I had finally untied the knot. The collapse didn't happen in one dramatic explosion. Came in quieter pieces, like a building failing one beam at a time. I didn't hear about it directly from my parents. I heard it from the outside, the way truth usually arrives when people stop controlling the narrative. First, my aunt mentioned that the house refinancing hadn't gone through. Their credit isn't what it used to be, she said cautiously. Then a cousin hinted that a few friends had declined to co-sign anything. Then my brother confirmed it one night in a tired, flat voice. They're behind on 2 payments, he said. Utilities and the credit line. Dad's pretending it's temporary. Mom's pretending it's not happening. I felt no joy, no vindictive thrill. Just a heavy, sinking confirmation of something I'd known for years. They had built their sense of stability on other people's endurance. And now the endurance had limits. A week later, my father called again. His voice was different this time. Not commanding. Not sharp. Thin. We need help, he said. Not I need help. We need help. As if the word would spread the shame evenly enough to make it bearable. What kind of help? I asked quietly. A loan, he said. The room went very still around me. How much? I asked. He hesitated. Enough to catch up. Just for a little while. The words curled into my chest in a familiar way. Temporary. Just a little while. The same language that had always meant forever when it came to me. And what happens after? I asked. After what? After the loan, I clarified. After you're caught up. What changes so this never happens again? Silence. Long enough that I could hear him breathing through the receiver. Things will stabilize, he said finally. I almost smiled. That's not a plan, I said. His voice tightened. Are you really going to turn us away when we're struggling? The old script tried to rise again, guilt as glue, obligation as oxygen. I felt it in my throat for a second. Then it passed. I already turned that page, I replied softly. You taught me to. You're punishing us, he said bitterly. No, I answered. I'm refusing to save you the way no one ever saved me. This is different, he snapped. You chose your path. So did you, I said. He exhaled sharply. So that's it? You'll just watch us sink? I leaned against my counter, staring at the faint reflection of my face in the darkened window. No, I said. I'll watch you finally have to swim. Call ended without goodbye. 2 days later, my mother called. Her voice was small in a way I'd never heard it before. Your father is talking about selling the house, she said. I closed my eyes. That house had been the center of everything. The symbol of success. Place where my absence had once gone unnoticed because the walls were so loud with everyone else's presence. That might be the right move, I said gently. She inhaled sharply. You really won't help? Question wasn't angry anymore. It was afraid. I stayed silent for a long moment before answering. I will not be the emergency fund that keeps the same pattern alive, I said. But I will not stop you from changing it. She whispered my name like it was a prayer. We don't know how, she said. And suddenly, for the first time in my life, that was true. People who had always claimed authority over my survival had reached the edge of their own knowledge. Then learn, I replied softly. The way I had to. The next months were quiet in a way that meant damage was happening somewhere out of sight. The house went up for sale. My father's car disappeared from the driveway in a grainy listing photo my brother sent me with shaking hands. They're letting go of everything, he said. My brother, meanwhile, grew steadier. He took on a second job, paid his own insurance, learned the quiet panic of adult responsibility without turning it into entitlement. One evening, he looked at me and said, "If you had sent that money, they'd still be pretending everything was fine." I nodded. And you'd still be pretending you didn't have choices. Late one night, my mother sent me a message that changed something irrevocably. We sold the house today. I stared at the words for a long time. The house was gone. Not just a building. A symbol. The stage on which every imbalance of our family had played out. I typed back, I hope you find a place that feels lighter. She replied, we're moving into a small apartment. After that, there were no more demands. No more pressure. Only silence heavy with consequence. And in that silence, something shifted in me. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to them. I was simply living. I didn't expect to see them in person again so soon after the house sold. I thought the distance would stretch quietly into years of polite avoidance and unresolved consequences. I was wrong. 3 weeks after my mother texted that they'd moved into a small apartment, my father showed up at my office. Not the building lobby. Not the parking lot. My actual floor. My coworker buzzed my desk and whispered, "There's a man here asking for you by first and last name." My stomach tightened instantly. When I stepped into the hallway and saw him standing there in his worn jacket with his hands shoved into his pockets like he didn't know what to do with them anymore, something in my chest shifted. He looked smaller. Not defeated. Not apologetic. Just stripped of the armor he used to wear so naturally. "We need to talk," he said quietly. I glanced behind him at the open office doors and then pointed down the hall. "Outside," I said. We sat across from each other on opposite sides of a metal cafe table a block away. The noise of traffic filled the gaps where Control used to sit. "Your mother didn't want me to come," he said finally. "But I did anyway." "You always did," I replied. He didn't bite. Instead, he stared at his coffee like it might give him instructions. "We lost the house," he said. "I know," I answered. "You don't understand what that feels like," he muttered. I tilted my head. "I lost my safety long before you did. I just wasn't allowed to call it that." He swallowed. "We're starting over," he said. The words sounded foreign in his mouth. "Welcome to adulthood," I replied gently. He flinched, not in anger but in recognition. "We made mistakes," he said. "Not I. We." Still hiding behind the plural. "Yes," I agreed. Silence settled again. "You really won't help us at all," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," I replied. "But I also won't interfere. You get to live the lesson you handed me." He finally looked up at me then, eyes clouded with something that might have been regret or might have been fear. "You're not my little girl anymore," he said. I met his gaze without resentment. You stopped having one when you decided I was supposed to raise myself emotionally. That landed hard. His jaw trembled slightly before he controlled it. Your mother thinks you hate us, he said quietly. I don't, I replied. But I don't love the version of you that only showed up when it benefited you. His shoulders sagged. For the first time I could remember, he looked tired in a way that wasn't just physical. Tired of defending. Tired of standing on a collapsing narrative. When you were born, he said suddenly, I promised myself I'd raise strong children. My chest tightened. Strong doesn't mean unsupported, I said. Strong means knowing you're allowed to fall. He nodded slowly. Not argument. Not denial. Just acceptance. We sat like that for a long time before he stood. I don't know what kind of relationship we're supposed to have now, he said. I looked at him calmly. One without ownership, I said. If you can handle that. He hesitated, then nodded once. We'll see, he murmured. He walked away without turning back. That night, my brother called after hearing our parents had visited me. How bad was it? He asked. Not bad, I said. Just real. He was quiet for a moment. They're different now, he said. Not better. Just not pretending anymore. I leaned back on my couch and stared at the ceiling. Neither am I. After that meeting, a strange quiet settled in. Not the tense silence of unfinished fights, but the uneasy stillness that follows when all the weapons have been laid on the table and no one knows what to pick up next. My parents didn't call for several weeks. No demands. No guilt-laced updates. No emergency declarations. The absence felt unfamiliar after months of emotional ambush. My brother said they were trying to adjust. That was his polite way of saying they were lost without control. Meanwhile, my life kept moving. Quietly. Productively. I was promoted again, not with fanfare but with a revised contract slid across a conference table and a steady raise that made my hands tremble only after I left the room. I signed without asking anyone's permission. That night, alone in my apartment with the city glittering outside my windows, I realized something shocking. I didn't feel the urge to tell my parents at all. The old hunger for their approval didn't flare. It didn't even whisper. It just wasn't there. A month passed before my mother finally called. Her voice was gentler than I remembered. Softer around the edges. We're settling into the apartment, she said. It's small but quiet. I waited. Your father found a part-time job, she added. That stopped me. Not because I felt triumph, but because I could hear the bruising of pride in the words. That's good, I said honestly. Another pause. We were thinking maybe dinner sometime, she said carefully. There it was. The first tentative bridge. No command. No expectation of obedience. An invitation. I didn't answer right away. I thought about every dinner that had ended with me shrinking at the table. Every celebration where my achievements were footnotes while my brother's life was the headline. On my terms, I said finally. Public place. Short. She exhaled in relief. Of course. We met at a quiet restaurant near my office. Neutral ground again. My parents arrived early. They stood when I approached the table like they were greeting a stranger rather than a daughter who had once run barefoot through their halls. My father looked around nervously as if expecting witnesses. My mother smiled in that careful way people do when they're afraid one wrong move might collapse the fragile peace they're trying to build. We ordered. Water. Nothing fancy. Conversation felt like walking on glass. Weather. Work. Traffic. My mother finally spoke the truth sideways. We didn't know how bad things were for you back then. I nodded slowly. You didn't ask. My father swallowed. We assumed you were handling it. You assumed because it was convenient, I replied calmly. The edge in my voice didn't break the moment, clarified it. "We were wrong," he said quietly. Not apology, not defense, just a statement of fact. It was more than I'd ever gotten before. My mother clasped her hands together. "We're not asking for money," she said quickly. "We just wanted to see you." I studied their faces. Power in the room had changed. No leverage, no shields, just two aging people facing the adult they hadn't planned for. "We can eat," I said. "That's all today is." They nodded. We ate. The food was good. The silence between us wasn't hostile, just cautious. The end, my father surprised me. "Your brother told us you're leading projects now," he said. I met his eyes. "Yes." He hesitated. "That takes skill." I acknowledged that with a small nod. It wasn't praise, but it wasn't dismissal either. When we stood to leave, my mother hugged me lightly, like she was afraid I might disappear if she held on too long. My father didn't hug me. He simply said, "Thank you for coming." That felt heavier than affection ever had. Over the next months, the pattern continued. Occasional dinners, short calls, neutral territory. I didn't volunteer details. They didn't demand. Distance became the structure of our relationship instead of the weapon. My brother adjusted too, moving between both worlds without being owned by either. One night, sitting in my apartment with the windows open and rain whispering against the glass, he said, "They finally stopped calling me to convince you." I smiled faintly. That's what acceptance sounds like. He looked at me carefully. "Do you ever regret it?" I thought about the bonus, the birthday candle, the lawyer's letter, the sold house, the small apartment, coffee table where control had finally lost its grip. "No," I said. "I only regret how long it took me to believe I was allowed to say no." With distance came clarity. Not the kind that burns, but the kind that settles like dust after a storm. My parents no longer filled my days with anxiety, but they still existed on the edge of my life like old scars, no longer raw, just reminders. My career, on the other hand, surged forward in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. The first major project I led alone landed a national client. My inbox flooded with congratulations. My boss shook my hand with something that finally felt like pride rather than evaluation. And for the first time, my success wasn't followed by dread. No one would demand it. No one would guilt it out of my hands. It would remain exactly where it belonged. With me. That night, my brother came over with cheap beer and expensive exhaustion written all over his face. "They're struggling with the new reality," he said quietly. "Dad hates asking for directions. Mom hates budgeting." I smiled softly. "Welcome to the real world." He studied me. "You're different now. Not hardened. Just rooted." The word surprised me. Rooted. "That's what boundaries do," I said. "They give you something solid to stand on." A strange shift happened after that. My parents stopped talking about money altogether. No hints. No indirect comments. No emotional fishing. The silence around finances was louder than any argument we'd ever had, but it was also respectful in a way our relationship had never been before. On my 30th birthday, my mother sent a simple message. "Happy birthday. I hope you're happy." Not dramatic. Not forgetful. Just present. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying, "Thank you. I am." And for the first time, those words were completely true. Weeks later, my father showed up again. This time not at my job, not at a restaurant, but at the small art show my team put together at a downtown venue. My name was printed on the wall beneath a featured project. He stood behind me quietly for a moment before I noticed him. "You built all this," he said softly. Not accusation. Not claim. Observation. I did, I replied. Without us, he added. I turned to face him. Not without you. Without your permission. He nodded once, slowly. That night after he left, I realized something quietly radical. He had seen the full measure of what I'd become without being able to touch it. And that, for someone like him, was heavier than defeat. My brother called later that week. They're proud of you, he said. I let out a small laugh. Proud doesn't pay emotional debt. No, he agreed. But it changes the story they tell themselves. I leaned back on my couch and looked up at the ceiling. Good, I said. Because I already changed mine. And in that moment, I knew the power had shifted completely. Not in a loud, revenge-driven way, but in the quiet permanence of a life no longer structured around escape. The first time I realized I had actual, unquestionable financial stability, it didn't come from a big purchase or a dramatic milestone. It came from something quieter. A plumbing issue in my bathroom. A busted pipe at 2 a.m. Water pouring onto the tile like panic in liquid form. I didn't freeze. I didn't calculate whether I could afford to fix it. I called emergency services, signed the invoice, and went back to bed. The next morning, when I checked my account, the balance barely flinched. That was the moment I understood. Survival had finally ended. I was living now. A month later, my company reorganized and my department doubled in size. With it came a raise that felt unreal even when I saw the numbers typed on official letterhead. I didn't celebrate publicly. I went home, cooked myself dinner, and sat in silence, letting the meaning of it settle. The old version of me, the one who ate grocery store cake alone on her birthday, would have thought this was a fantasy. Not long after that, my brother called in the middle of a weekday afternoon. His voice sounded strained. They're in trouble again, he said quietly. I leaned back in my chair. What kind? Mom slipped in the apartment stairwell. Nothing broken. But Dad missed 3 days of work taking care of her. They're short on rent. The words hovered in the air between us. I felt the familiar weight of the crossroads. This time, though, I wasn't standing at the edge without resources. This time, I held the ground. Are they asking me? I asked. Not directly, he admitted. But they're hoping. I closed my eyes. In my head, I replayed every demand, every threat, every attempt to turn me into a family ATM. Then I imagined my parents in their small apartment, stripped of illusion, forced into real limitation for the first time in their lives. Tell them I can help, I said. My brother's breath hitched. Really? Yes, I continued. But not the way they expect. That evening, I called my parents myself. The silence on their end when they saw my name on the screen told me everything. I heard about Mom, I said calmly. I hope she's healing. My mother's voice trembled. She is. Slowly. Good, I replied. Then I drew the line. I can cover 1 month of your rent so you don't fall behind. My father sucked in a breath. Relief and pride collided in his silence. But, I added, this is not a loan. It's not tradition. It's a one-time reset. After this, your finances are not my responsibility. Tension sharpened. You're putting conditions on helping your own parents now? My father said. No, I replied evenly. I'm defining boundaries. That's what adults do. My mother whispered my name. I could hear the unspoken fear in it. We'll accept, she said. On your terms. My father hesitated longer. Then, finally, on your terms, he repeated stiffly. I transferred the money that night. The transaction didn't feel like surrender. It felt like authorship. For the first time in my life, I was giving without being owned by what I gave. The next morning, my mother texted, "Thank you." Truly. No justification. No future expectations hidden between words. Just gratitude. Something in me loosened quietly. When my brother heard what I'd done later that week, he shook his head in disbelief. "You didn't save them," he said. "You showed them how to stand." "Exactly," I replied. "There's a difference." And for the first time since this entire war had begun, I felt neither defensive nor remorseful. I felt clean, like someone who finally understood the rules of her own power. The test didn't come immediately. That was how I knew it was real. For the first 2 weeks after I covered their rent, there were no extra calls. No just checking in excuses. No sudden emergencies. My parents stayed carefully inside the boundaries I had drawn, like people learning the edges of a dark room by touch. My mother sent one update, she was feeling better. My father sent one short message, the rent is stable now. No guilt. No hints. No fishing. I allowed myself to exhale. Then the third week arrived. It started with something small. My father asked if I knew a good accountant. Innocent enough. I gave him a referral and thought nothing of it. 2 days later, my mother texted asking if I could review a document quickly. I almost refused out of instinct. Instead, I asked what it was. A budget plan. I looked it over, made a few neutral suggestions, and returned it without commentary. Another week passed. Then came the first crack. My father called late at night. Too late. The kind of late that used to mean crisis. "We might need just a little more help," he said carefully. The room went very still around me. "With what?" I asked. "The car," he replied. "Repairs are more than expected." There it was. Pattern trying to reassert itself. Exception becoming habit. One time becoming precedent. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch until it made him uncomfortable. "I already helped," I said calmly. And I was clear about the terms. He cleared his throat. "Yes, you were. But this is unexpected." I leaned back in my chair. "So was my bonus to you," I said. Another pause. "So that's a no," he said flatly. "That's a boundary," I replied. "There's a difference." He exhaled sharply. "You've changed," he muttered. I smiled faintly. "Yes. You keep noticing." The next day my brother called. "He's angry," he said. He thought once you helped once, things would soften. "They did soften," I replied. "They didn't dissolve." "He says you're still punishing them," my brother added. "That helping once and refusing again is cruelty." I closed my eyes. "No," I said. "Helping without losing myself is growth. For all of us." That night, I sat on my balcony again, the same place I had once watched the city lights, and realized my life was finally moving with me instead of against me. I thought about how easy it would be to slide backward. How tempting it still was, on some instinctual level, to buy peace with money rather than enforce it with language. But I also knew what the cost of that peace had always been: my silence, my stress, my erasure. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. My mother called. Not to ask for money. To say this: "Your father was wrong to assume. We'll handle the car ourselves." There was embarrassment in her voice. And something else, too. Resolve. "Thank you for respecting my boundary," I said quietly. She hesitated. "We still don't understand how you became like this," she admitted. "So steady." I considered that. "You taught me what happens when no one protects you," I said. "I just learned to do it myself." After that, the attempts stopped. Not because the need disappeared, but because the rules had finally become real to them. My father remained distant. My mother remained careful. My brother remained the bridge, but no longer the messenger of guilt. One evening, sitting across from him at my table, he said, "You're the only person in this family who ever changed the system instead of surviving it." The words landed heavier than praise. "I didn't change them," I replied. "I changed access to me." He nodded. And that changed everything. In that moment, I realized this was the true climax of the story. Not the confrontation. Not the legal threats. Not even the sold house. This quiet, irreversible shift where control stopped being assumed and started being negotiated. And for the first time in my life, negotiation happened on equal ground. The strangest thing about peace is how quiet it is once you finally earn it. No explosions. No dramatic declarations. Just a steady life that doesn't require permission to exist. Months passed after that last boundary held. No more late-night crisis calls. No more unexpected needs. No more emotional invoices disguised as family love. My parents stayed within the limits I had drawn, not because they fully understood them, but because they finally respected that crossing them had consequences they could no longer afford. My brother stabilized into his own adulthood. His voice changed over time. Less defensive. Less uncertain. "I finally get why you never came back," he told me one evening. "It's different when no one is funding your decisions." I smiled softly. "It's terrifying at first," I said. "Then it becomes freedom." My career climbed in ways I had once believed were reserved for other people's children. I bought a new car without asking permission. I traveled without explaining myself. I rested without guilt. $10,000 bonus that had ignited this entire war became a footnote in a much larger transformation. It hadn't changed my life because of what it bought. Changed my life because of what it forced me to confront. Truth about my family. Truth about myself. The truth about what strength really costs when it's demanded instead of chosen. On my next birthday, I didn't wait to see who would remember. I took myself to dinner. I bought my own cake. I invited the people who had proven they wouldn't disappear when I stopped being useful. My phone buzzed halfway through dessert. My mother. "Happy birthday. I hope this year is gentle to you." I stared at the message and felt nothing sharp rise in me. No anger. No ache. Just calm. I typed back, "Thank you. It already is." Later that night, standing alone on my balcony with the city glowing beneath me, I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who learned early that love came with conditions. The one who learned that being strong was often code for being convenient. The one who learned that silence was cheaper than asking for what she deserved. That girl thought revenge would look like humiliation. Like confrontation. Like watching someone else hurt the way she had hurt. She was wrong. Real revenge didn't look like fire. It looked like light. It looked like a life so whole that the people who once controlled it no longer recognized their place in it. My parents once forgot my birthday and demanded half of my $10,000 bonus like it was a debt I owed for being born. They thought money still meant control. They were wrong. Money only meant control when I believed I needed them to survive. The moment I stopped believing that, the power shifted forever. I didn't destroy my family. I didn't even abandon them. I simply removed myself from the system that required my sacrifice to function. And in doing so, I saved myself. Not everyone will understand your boundaries. Not everyone will celebrate your independence. Some people will only love the version of you that benefits them. Let them keep that memory. You don't owe it a future. I didn't glow up by proving them wrong. I glowed up by no longer needing to prove anything at all. And that was the first gift I ever gave myself that no one could demand back.